the barbarian invasions. Everyone wants a single reason for the death of an empire. They look for the killer with the knife in his hand. And for Rome, the easiest culprit is always the barbarian. Goths, Vandals, Huns, names we learn to fear, and with good reason. For centuries, we kept them on the other side of the Rhine and the Danube in the cold darkness. But in the 4th century, something changed. The darkness moved. Fleeing a worse terror from the steppes, the Goths crossed our borders, first as refugees, then as invaders. At Adrianople, they not only defeated our legions, they killed an emperor on the battlefield. Rome's armor was cracked. Then in 410, the unthinkable happened. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, marched on Rome and sacked it. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City was violated. The shock was so great it paralyzed the world. Decades later, the Vandals returned to finish the job, a sack so brutal it gave the world a new word for destruction. The final blow was a sad joke. A barbarian chieftain named Odoacer simply deposed the last emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. The little Augustus. He didn't even bother to take the throne. He just sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople like someone returning broken equipment. But blaming the barbarians is easy. It's the lazy soldier's excuse. The truth is that vultures only appear when the body is already dying. The real question is not why did they attack. The question is why was there no one left to defend the wall? Economic crisis, the end of conquest. The wall was empty because the money ran out. Simple as that. A soldier doesn't fight for free. For 300 years, Rome functioned as a perfect war machine. Our business model was conquest. The legions would march, break a kingdom, and return with mountains of gold, silver, and most importantly, slaves. This plunder paid the soldiers, financed roads, aqueducts, and the bread and circuses that kept the plebs quiet. But around the time of Trajan and Hadrian, the empire stopped growing. We reached our natural limits. The conquest stopped, and the plunder dried up. Suddenly, the empire had the expenses of a colossus, a gigantic army, a border of thousands of kilometers, and a bloated bureaucracy, but the income of a retired soldier. The engine stopped, the bills started coming due, and a desperate emperor with no new gold to spend looked at the old gold he already had, and had the worst idea in our history. Counterfeit currency, rampant inflation. The worst idea in our history. If you don't have enough gold to pay your soldiers, what do? Simple. You make counterfeit coins. The emperors began to debase the denarius. They would take a pure silver coin, melt it down, mix it with bronze and copper, and make 2 coins. Then 5, then 10. At first no one noticed, but soon the soldier on the frontier would look at his pay and see a worthless piece of coppery metal that barely had a silver wash. And the merchant in the market is no fool. If the money is worth less, he raises the price. The price of bread, of olive oil, of wine. Suddenly, a legionary's salary, which once bought his loyalty, barely bought a decent dinner. This has a name, inflation. For us, it was a poison. It destroyed the savings of an entire generation, wiped out everyone's nest egg, and worst of all, it broke the trust in the empire. If the emperor himself is a counterfeiter, why should a soldier be loyal to him? Crushing taxes, the predatory state. What happens when the state's money is worthless but the army still needs boots, swords, and grain? The state stops asking for money and starts taking things. This was the annona, a brutal tax, collected not in useless coins but in real goods. The tax collector would arrive at your farm and not ask for your gold. He would take your wheat, your cattle, your leather. The result was a disaster. The farmer, who is the backbone of any empire, would look at his land and think, well, why should I work all year under this wretched sun if in the end the government will take everything and leave me to starve? Thousands, then millions, abandoned their lands. It was better to flee to the cities and live on handouts or even flee to barbarian territory than to be enslaved by the Roman tax collector. The empire began to eat itself from within. For many citizens, the barbarian outside was a distant danger. The Roman soldier at your door taking your last harvest was the real enemy. Political corruption. The throne for sale. While the farmer was being crushed, what were our leaders in Rome doing? They were too busy killing each other and selling the empire to the highest bidder. The center of the rot was my old unit, the Praetorian Guard. Created to protect the emperor, they became his assassins and puppet masters. They were the only armed troops in Rome, and they realized they could choose who sat on the throne. And soon, they chose whoever paid the most. The lowest point of this shame was in the year 193. After murdering the Emperor Pertinax, those dogs did the unthinkable. They auctioned off the Roman Empire, literally. They stood on the walls of the camp and shouted to the city, "Kutonu, who makes the highest bid?" A rich and stupid senator named Didius Julianus offered 25,000 sestertii per soldier. He bought the throne. Of course, he didn't even last 3 months. The real generals on the frontiers, men who commanded real legions, heard about it and marched on Rome, disgusted, which leads us directly to the next disease. Constant civil war, the enemy within. Those disgusted generals who marched on Rome to clean up the Praetorian Guard's mess became the disease themselves. The 3rd century was proof of this. 50 years of chaos. More than 20 emperors. Most were frontier generals who, at the first sign of weakness in Rome, were acclaimed by their troops and marched to take the purple. They were called the barracks emperors. And almost none of them died of old age. They were murdered by their successors or by their own soldiers who were already eyeing the acclamation bonus from the next general. But the real price of this madness wasn't paid in Rome. It was paid on the Rhine, on the Danube. Think like a soldier. Every time an ambitious general decided he wanted to be emperor, what did he do? He took his best legions. From where? The frontier. We emptied the walls. We left Gaul, the Balkans, Britannia, all undefended. The barbarians didn't need a brilliant plan to invade. They just had to cross the street. We were too busy killing each other. An empire that is in perpetual war with itself has already lost. The division of the empire. The rich brother abandons the poor. The civil war was so devastating that an emperor with an iron fist, Diocletian, realized the truth. The empire was too big for one man alone. His solution was that of a general. He cut it into pieces. He created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 emperors to manage the crisis. But it was Constantine who made the division permanent. He not only legalized the new Christian faith, he created a new Rome in the east. Constantinople. It was a brilliant tactical decision, but it was the death sentence of the West. You see, the empire was not divided into 2 equal halves. It was divided into the rich part and the poor part. The East, Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, had the ancient cities, the dense population, the lucrative trade routes, and the gold. The West, Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, had forests, swamps, and a gigantic porous border infested with barbarians. The East had the money to pay armies and build impenetrable walls. The West had the bills to pay and no currency to do it with. When the real barbarian storm began, the East watched from the stands. Often they even paid the Huns and Goths to go west and attack us instead of them. They no longer saw us as the same legion. We were the poor, problematic flank, and they abandoned us to die. The mercenary army, wolves guarding the henhouse. The West was broke, abandoned, and with its borders on fire. But the worst part? We no longer had enough Romans to fight for Rome. Plagues had decimated the population. Crushing taxes made men flee enlistment. Who would want to die for the misery the empire offered? But we still needed bodies to guard the wall. The solution was the final desperate mistake. We stopped fighting the barbarians and started hiring them. They were called foederati, entire tribes of Goths, Franks, and Alemanni paid with Roman gold, or more often with Roman land, to fight under their own chieftains in the name of Rome. Wolves guarding the henhacksluis. At first it seemed to work, but a mercenary's loyalty lasts as long as the gold does. And our gold ran out. Worse, we were teaching our tactics, our discipline, and our organization to the men who, the following month, could be our enemies. The line between barbarian ally and barbarian invader became so thin it disappeared. Alaric, the man who sacked Rome in 410, was not some savage from the forests. He was a master of soldiers, a high-ranking general in the Roman army, who simply rebelled because he didn't get the pay and promotion he wanted. We were not invaded. We were the victims of a hostile takeover carried out by our own employees. The new faith, the change of soul. An empire is not made only of gold and steel. It is made of an idea, a belief that unites everyone. And as the body of Rome rotted, its soul was being conquered by a completely new faith. Our old religion was simple. It was a contract. We honored Jupiter, Mars, and the genius of the emperor. In return, they gave us victory in battle and prosperity at home. Your religion was your duty to the state. But this new faith, Christianity, was different. It spoke of a single God, a God who was above the emperor, a God who didn't care about the borders of Rome. Its promise was not glory in this life, but salvation in the next. This changes everything for a soldier. It changes everything for a citizen. Suddenly, the Roman Empire was no longer the ultimate prize. It was just a temporary and suffering-filled passage. The most intelligent and ambitious men, who generations before would have become senators or generals, now became bishops. The energy of Rome, its talent, its focus, it all shifted. The church became a state within the state, with its own laws, its own wealth, and its own loyalty. Christianity did not destroy the empire. It just gave it a decent funeral and built a new civilization on its grave. Plagues and apathy, the exhaustion of the Colossus. If you put all of this together, what do you have? An empire that was not murdered. It was a slow suicide, a death by 1,000 cuts. There were the wounds that no historian likes to talk about because they aren't heroic. The plagues, the Antonine plague, the plague of Cyprian, waves of disease that swept the empire and killed millions, a third of the population in some provinces. Fewer farmers to cultivate, fewer citizens to pay taxes, fewer strong young men to fill the ranks of the legions. Add to that the apathy, the weariness. People simply stopped believing in Rome. The idea was dead long before the body. The common citizen, crushed by taxes, afraid of the barbarian allies stationed in his city and faithless in the corrupt government, no longer saw the empire as something worth fighting for. In the end, there was no great final battle for the heart of the empire. The barbarians didn't knock down a gate of steel. They just pushed on a rotten wooden door that was already falling off its hinges. The Colossus was hollow on the inside, exhausted, broken, sick, and indifferent. The fall was not an event. It was just the end of a long and painful process. A tired giant finally lying down to die. The Murmillo, the fish man. If you think of a gladiator, you are probably thinking of this man. He is the pillar of the arena, the legionary of the Colosseum.